All right. All right, everybody. Well, hey, welcome to our Mass Media Podcast Mastermind webinars and podcast. Thank you guys for being here on Wednesday night. We are honored to have our special guest who is going to be joining us here. He's actually, you've probably heard him online already, back and forth there a little bit. Honored to have this guy joining us tonight. I think you guys are going to get a lot of information from what we talk about. I was honored to be a guest on his recent podcast. The business of podcasting. And my green screen, it's just Zoom is giving me issues tonight. Background screen doing all sorts of funny things. But anyway, honored to be here. It's honored to be a guest on his podcast, The Business of Podcasting, which I highly encourage all of you to go check it out, because the fact is that there are such amazing nuggets on there. Not just talk about my episode, all he's had on there. I was taking copious amount of notes the last couple of days as I've been listening. So if you've seen a spike, Charlie, it's me listening to every episode a couple of times. But
fantastic, I'll take it.
There you go. For you guys that don't know, Charlie is an amazing individual doing some big stuff out there. He's from Australia. He's been very pivotal in launching several other podcasts out there for some bigger names. But I am just I'll let him brag on himself a little bit here. But make sure you grab a pen and paper, take some notes, because I guarantee. If you don't know who he is, you're going to want to follow him online, because he's been sharing some amazing stuff recently. So we're glad to have the man, the myth, the podcasting legend from Valher Media, Mr. Charley Valher. How's it going today, Charlie?
Excellent. Wait, I've got it.
There you go. You got the applause-o-meter too. Very good. Very good.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and just so much happening in the podcast space at the moment in general. It's really taking off. I kind of think it's one of the silver linings of all this coronavirus crisis stuff going on, is that podcasts are just exploding at the moment.
Yeah, they totally are. I mean, we surpassed the million podcast million podcast mark earlier this week. Yeah, there you go. Congratulations to everybody. Very good. Exactly. But I still think everything I see about that and talk with people, it's still about the same amount of people, 25 to 30%, 35% maybe on the peaks of people still actually doing stuff on a regular basis. I mean, we've got a lot of inventory, a lot of shows out there that started, that hit the 10, 20, 30 episode mark and then pod faded off. But a lot of people, it's still a wide open opportunity for everybody, right, Charlie?
It is just such a developing space. And I mean, we might as well kick off there. Is like about, I'll say 18 months ago now, I really noticed there was a few kind of macro trends that were really kind of coming into favor for podcasting. And like, they still haven't unfolded properly yet, I will say. But I think they're really the big opportunity for everyone that's interested in podcasting itself. So what kind of started to happen is we noticed that Spotify started just acquiring like mad. And so far, I think at this point, they've spent over $500 million acquiring podcast-related businesses. So this is things like Anchor, distribution networks, recording things, anything that makes it easier to podcast, they're interested in. Which is a big move. And then the second thing is when Spotify started making some moves, all of a sudden Apple, we might actually update our podcast app. Like, we haven't done this since the beginning of iOS.
They might actually bring on more than 9 people total in the podcasting department there, right?
It's funny, like sometimes a bit of motivation. And then the next one was that Google started indexing podcasts itself. And I don't know about you, but like, I'm just one of these people that it's like, as much as I want to be a contrarian, like I love the idea of like being someone who zigs when they zags. But when I see 3 big companies lining up like this, and it's like, they aren't guessing, right? They're not guessing here. Like, they have analysts and researchers. I'm like, okay, we need to really start taking this stuff more seriously. Like, we really, really need to ramp up what the podcasting space is going to be. And rightly so. And then like on the other side of it, and this is my favorite. So you've got these 3 companies that are just like, we're going all in. Mm-hmm. And then you've got on the other side of it that like podcasts are now standard in every car and on every new smartphone. So accessibility is going through the roof. And then all the radio stations now have podcasts, and then they're actively telling people on radio, hey, listen to our podcast. It's like they're just pushing people to the new technology. So this is probably like the big like overarching theme of like what's made me so excited for the space. But this is what we need to be paying attention to as podcasters. Like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that when you start seeing mainstreams, even television shows, over here we've got ESPN.com, and all the announcers, all the sportscasters have their own podcast now, which and a lot of them were hesitant. They're like, oh no, well, I guess I better jump on the podcasting train, otherwise it'd be irrelevant. But it's also a great way for them to kind of keep their own voice as long as they're the ones running with it versus others. Like I'll give you an example, like iHeartMedia. With iHeartMedia laying off so much of their staff a few months back ago, their on-air radio staff, a lot of those guys and gals didn't have anything as far as podcasting wise. Now they're out there trying to create their their message and get back in front of their audience. And so I think it's kind of a great way to be a saving grace as people transition and things come up and go down quite a bit. Would you agree with that, Charlie?
Definitely. I would absolutely agree with that. And it's just another example of like things moving towards this trend.
Mm-hmm. And everybody is sitting here listening, and we've seen a dip, I think. Overall, don't get me wrong, there's some niches out there, some segments of podcasting has seen quite an increase in downloads with everything going on right now. But I also think a lot of them have seen a bit of a dip. I know my numbers have dipped on the audio as far as downloads, but my views, I was just looking at it an hour ago, my video views for the same episodes have actually gone up quite a bit. So I think it's important that podcasting is such a huge facet. Everybody should be adding it, but it's also I think it's just one cog in the wheel of marketing, trying.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting topic. So just for context, like we have a podcast agency. Like I'm a mad podcaster myself, but we also look after podcasts for clients. And what's unique about that is like I get to experience like my own show and what happens within that, but I also get to see in all these other shows and like see what's happening from there. So in the last kind of, let's say, 2 months, it's been really, really interesting to see like different niches and what's working and not working. One of the things it's very true, and much to your point, is like audio has actually like across the board, like we've seen a bit of a dip. And like, I can tell you why this is straight away is because commute times and gym times, like people aren't in that car time like they were, or they weren't at the gym like they were. So that's where we're seeing that. But for the shows that do video, much to your point there, like absolutely exploding. Like some of our shows are actually like doubling just from the video side. Now, as you said, like niche specific, and I'll give you some examples. We have a client who's in travel, and it's like if you've ever seen like what falling off a cliff looks like on a chart, this is it. It's horrendous. That one exactly. that is the experience. But I mean, no one's really surprised by that. And do you know what? When travel reopens, I'm sure it'll bounce back. Like I'm not particularly worried. But then on the other side of things, like some of the shows that are doing really well, particularly on video at the moment, is financial education, and then also business. So like these are the two categories where it's like people are, oh, what's going on in the world? I need more info. I'm hungry for info to do better here and know what's going on. So like that type of broadcasting is just really taking off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are not listening because they're not in their usual listening habits, but they are on their computers, watching, taking in. I mean, they're getting tired of the traditional CNN and Fox News and the other media channels, but listening in on YouTube as a way that's maybe not taking as much bandwidth, but maybe a little bit more. It's more tailored to what they want to actually listen to versus hearing about COVID-19 for the millionth time in a 30-minute stretch and stuff like that. So
to go deeper there, like I actually, this is my personal view, and I'm always cautious of this because like I'm wrong a lot of the time.
Hey, you can admit it. You must be married. Yeah, right.
Yes, I am. But to your point here is that I actually feel like a lot of news organizations have actually become clickbait organizations, and a lot of organizations that used to report news now report opinions. And there's this really, really big shift in media. And I mean, I'm sure it's very similar, if not worse, in the US, but in Australia, it's like it's very polarizing environment. But I think what they've missed is that this has been going on for so long now, like that most people don't really take the news so seriously anymore. Like we think of it less as truth and more as like, oh, it's kind of like this fake thing or skewed opinions. So podcasting has all of a sudden become, I suppose, less fake. It's become actually more of a source of reliability because you feel like you are actually connecting with a real human rather than something that might be orchestrated by the higher powers or something like that. If it happens, I don't know, but like certainly makes me think.
Well, they did a study. I was watching somewhere. I don't know if it was John Oliver one night here, who's on HBO, stuff like that. They were talking about some of the big media outlets where you could literally see on the same weekend or over a matter of days, each anchor bringing up and reading verbatim, word for word, on a specific story across different states, different cities, different things. And so you have to realize, yeah, there's a big brother aspect of things out there. With all the big media conglomerates for sure, that they're kind of marching to their own drum and they have their own agendas. And that's why I think, podcasting is a last aspect of free speech for all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we're able to identify with our followers or our people listen to our shows. They trust us. They follow us, whether it's on the audio or video side. And so that's why I think it's such a great, it's not quite intimate, but pretty dang close to being intimate relationships with our listeners because they know what we're doing and we know what's going on, and being able to utilize that stuff to really deliver great information, great value to them on a day in, day out basis, whether we're dealing with a national or international crisis or pandemic as well too, for things.
Well, I would argue that a lot of Americans, particularly even Australians, would take Joe Rogan more seriously than they would CNBC or Fox News.
That says a lot about the world there. But yeah, I agree. Whether he's high in peyote or weed or smoking it with Elon, we all, the need for a normal middle person in the middle is more, I think he's required more now than ever. I don't know if you would put Joe Rogan in the middle of everything, but that's definitely an important thing. But that comes down to also when you start thinking about who's listening or who's watching, kind of identifying your audience and maybe new people that are coming in or looking for your information about what your show is, especially right now. What are some of the ways that you're dealing with your clients and you're the podcast that you guys are managing out there to help kind of overcome those dips or dive into those new potential listeners or viewers?
Do you know what? I'd be lying if I said the most common question I get isn't about podcast growth. These days, it really, really is. Like constantly, once upon a time, it was, which microphone should I use? I don't tend to get that one as much anymore. Like that was the old favorite. But the way we work with a lot of clients and a lot of people I speak to, there's kind of three areas that it comes down to. So one is podcast growth. One is like, the other is, or second, I should say, is like, how do I make great podcast content? And then the third is like, how do I monetize? And these are the areas we play. And then in more recent times, let's say over the last, actually, I'll say this year, podcast growth has become the most, I suppose, discussed topic. And I think, how many downloads are we getting becomes a really, really interesting point of conversation with a lot of podcasters. So this is what we've kind of experienced and what I've seen. And I'll also share some of like what is and isn't working here. So overwhelmingly, podcasting is getting more popular. I will not deny this for a second. Like there is more new podcasts than ever. There really is. And this doesn't mean that they're not fading out, but like competition is absolutely fierce. And what that means is that discoverability in things like iTunes or Spotify is getting incredibly hard. So one of the things we've really noticed is that if you are launching a podcast or you're in a podcast space and you once upon a time were seeing growth in those channels, that's where you're being hit the most. You have to start to look exteriorly from just like iTunes as you probably could once upon a time. So that's the one from there. The next thing is like over the last 12 months, and like this is might as well pick this fight here. Why not? This is the place to start. I hope it's actually on these platforms while we do this. I'm just going to say it is that I'm really, really, really not having fun with organic at all anymore. And what I mean by that is if you've got a podcast and you're putting it on your Facebook page or on your Twitter or on your LinkedIn or your Instagram or even on your Pinterest, is like over the last at least couple of years, I feel like this is the like boiling frog story. It's like it used to be good, but it's like we're all sitting in this water and they're just making it worse and worse and worse, but we're not noticing. So the organic experience has just been really terrible. And it's kind of left me a little bit frustrated, a little bit annoyed, and going, what do we do here? Like, how do we approach this? So one of the things I've been really focused on this year is like paid approaches. Like, are these networks pay to play? And can we start to use paid ads to grow our podcasts like much more effectively? So my favorite kind of strategy at the moment, we're doing a lot of video podcasts, much like you, Scott. I think that is absolutely the future of podcasting. But we're taking a lot of our video content and then we're actually running YouTube ads, Facebook ads, Twitter ads. We're just about to start Pinterest ads as well, is the next one on the list. We want to try it. And seeing massive, massive gains from it, which has just been so awesome to experience. Now, this is kind of the construct I would look at from here. I've been hunting the internet, and you've probably seen me. I've been asking everyone, it's like, who's killing it with organic? Who is the person like that's actually getting results with organic? Because maybe I'm just bad at this stuff. And maybe we just don't know what we're doing. And pretty much every person I've found that says they're doing it, I can beat them for $20. And I just go, well, why would you put the effort into like all the stuff you're doing when $20 would save me all that time to actually like grow a podcast? So paid ads has been absolutely the way we've been really pushing ahead. And this is something we're planning to do a lot more of as well.
Now, I will always say that I think that a lot of people rely on organic reach because they're lazy. Joe Fier, your buddy Joe Fier and my buddy Joe Fier and I had the conversation that we figure a lot of podcasters fall into kind of two categories. Well, there's 4 categories. You have half of them that don't want to do it, that want to do a show but never get around to posting a show. The other half that have a show, but in that half that have a show, you have break into 2 things. Ones that want to do the least amount of work. That means I'm just going to post to the free stuff, or the other half that really takes it as a business approach and markets it as a business. Like, I mean, I come from a business background and I run my podcast supports my business and what we're doing. And so I'm not opposed to putting in, running ads or doing things, testing the waters in different phases to find out what the biggest bang for my buck. But you said something very valuable there. All these people doing all these extra works trying to save a buck are stepping over dollars when they could spend $20 and get twice, 2-3 times the amount of traffic and save a lot of time, right? Is that what you're seeing with the numbers?
Absolutely. And the challenge still stands. Anyone watching this, if you can beat me for $20, I'm open to it. Like, let's go. I'm ready. But it was really interesting, even from when you were on my podcast, which I really enjoyed, but something I hadn't considered either was like radio syndication. Like, there's amazing options available if you're willing to think a bit uniquely in this space. And I was even speaking to a guy this morning that he purchases spots on mobile apps. And that's how he's bringing people to it. And I'm just like, oh, there is so many unique opportunities if we can just move around from the idea that we're going to post this stuff on I'm not going to bag one of the social media platforms because they're all equally terrible organically. So all of them.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, they're all different, but ever since Facebook started limiting the amount of percentage of our friends or followers from seeing all our organic stuff, or maybe it's just 10% now or less. That's just it's the same 10% of people that are looking at it. That's not really what we're trying to do for a lot of things business-wise, unless you are running into a business account. I do have a couple questions, and I want to get to them here before we dive into this next part real fast, Peter. Charlie, Peter asked a question. He goes, what are the numbers for pod fade? What are you seeing in your stuff? And he also says paid ads on what platforms. We'll get to that one in a second. So let's talk about the pod fade aspect of that first, Charlie, huh?
So this is a really interesting one with pod fade or in general. What I found is that most people go through this wave of excitement, and then if the results they're expecting from their podcast don't hit near that wave of excitement, they just decline. And I just think that's like you really have to think of it as a very, very different sport. So in a previous business, I owned a marketing agency, and like never in the world of ever did the first ad. It's not like we wrote one ad and it's like, well, we're done here.
Mic drop. See you later.
Yeah, you are welcome. Tell your friends. Like it never ever happened. Like the attitude and mindset of split testing and trying things and like very much going, do you know what? Like, especially if it's your first podcast, it's probably going to suck for the first 10 episodes. like you're probably not going to be that good at it. You're probably going to have to build skills and develop into it. And like, you know, I often joke that podcasting's like comedy. It's like, if you ever see a good comedian, it's like, oh, he's not even trying. I'm like, no, that's the skill. Like he's actually trying his ass out, but doesn't look like he's doing anything. Like it is a skill set to develop. So what I kind of say to people is that normally someone will be excited for about 2 months, right?
Mhm.
If you've got a weekly episode coming out, which is most of them, that's about 8 episodes. And funnily enough, that data matches up with what we get from iTunes. So that is there. Now, in my experience, I've launched several successful shows from scratch, and it's like 3 months is the average point to get traction, and then 6 months is the average point in which you will start to see very real rewards, and like I would say, building an authentic fan base. And look, there's a lot that goes into it, but like that's an expectation I would kind of set from like Podfade and like what you really need to be in the mindset for. And you might be 8 episodes in and have to say, do you know what? This concept completely sucked. We need to try something new here. We need to do something different.
Our buddy, he's the host of the Travel Wins podcast on traveling. So I can see probably a number dropping in for your listeners, people with everything going on like it is in the industry. Not his full-time job, but it's his one thing that he does is traveling for work and interviewing different people about travel. So let's see here. We got another question here. Laura says, what platforms have you found the most success in for advertising? So why don't we dive into that? Because you've been doing a lot of split testing and I've been following us on the Facebook side. And are we talking, you're kind of blown away at how inexpensive what you're seeing is working for you, correct?
Well, there's a few things here, and I love this question because I asked it for myself. I was like, well, what's actually working right now? So currently at this point, what I'm doing is I'm testing Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube on my own show. And then on some selective client shows who are open for this could not work. In full disclosure. And what I'm doing is I'm spending the same amount on each of them per day. And then we're actually measuring that at the moment because I'm very, very curious. So I'll tell you some of like the initial findings. Straight out, Twitter has some of the cheapest placements I have seen. Like there's just, I don't know if there's not enough advertisers versus users, or they're just cheaper on their inventory, but Twitter is a really fantastic place at the moment. I'm enjoying it. I quite like the targeting there because you can actually target individual Twitter handles, which is like actual, like you cannot get that on like Facebook targeting or Instagram targeting, which is really, really cool. The next one I'm really liking at the moment is YouTube. And like YouTube is quite interesting because you get this mix of like targeting by keywords and also by channels. So if I said, you know what, put my ads in front of everything Scott does, you could totally do that. Like that's actually conceivable from a targeting point. Or if your podcast, like if you've got an episode that solves a particular problem, like it's how to close distressed real estate, like you could actually make an episode just come up when they were to search things like that. So really, really unique there in that you can do that. So very, very different intent. And again, what I love about this is it's not just for my own show, is that like we do things for clients. This is something we're going to be teaching later in the year. We want to make sure that if you've got a podcast that's particularly suited to, let's say, a Twitter or a YouTube audience, it's knowing which platform might be the best for you as well. And there is definitely a bit of that. The next one I will say is Instagram. Instagram is attached to Facebook ads. They're the same platform. So if you're doing Facebook ads, you can select to do Instagram placements or both and mix it in there. Now, I will say this is like, in my opinion, Facebook just has a really, really well developed platform. Mm-hmm. It's very, very easy to use, very easy to get started, and they have some amazing remarketing opportunities that exist within it as well. So I'm liking that one as well. As for like, I guess you have to decide how you want to rank these as better or worse. And this is what I'll find interesting from there. So Twitter, definitely the cheapest for placements. YouTube, definitely the most expensive at this point, but the quality of the people and the intent and what you can put episodes behind is just fantastic. And then Facebook, somewhere in the middle, but Facebook is actually doing the best for what we call remarketing ads, or ads in general, for like growing the list and I suppose taking people deeper into the relationship. So that's kind of the discovery of there. And then Instagram, I'll kind of lump in a little bit with Facebook. We're just about to roll out some isolated tests, but my whole thing is that if you're in a niche, like let's say you're in fitness, or potentially travel when that kicks into gear. So maybe this is probably a reason why that platform isn't doing that well at the moment. But I would suspect that if that's your space, like that's probably one of the ones you want to be paying more attention to.
Now, would you recommend, because Peter asked a question, would you recommend that if people are looking to expand, to make sure they add a video aspect to what they're doing, or just sticking with the audio side of things, especially on YouTube? Because, you know, a lot of people are taking and uploading their audio to YouTube, but just putting, you know, an image, you know, stagnant image, versus something like this where it's us back and forth talking and communicating. What do you recommend, Charlie?
So that's a really good question. So what we kind of covered is the difference in the platforms, but we can talk about like the creative now, because I feel like this is a really important part. So going back, what we used to run is what's called audiograms. And I'm sure you've seen an audiogram. And I want to say this straight out. I've never seen a successful audiogram test. They just really, really aren't working. So if you're someone who's thinking, oh, I'll just make an audiogram and I'll start using that for ads, I will save you the donation. I will do it right now. I've made that donation for you. We don't need to make that twice. So
I appreciate that. I think a lot of people do out there. Hang on a second.
Yeah, but that's money in the bank right there.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing is, and this is where I would kind of like into your thinking of like, are you going to do, like, are you a lazy podcaster or an active one? We intentionally did a video podcast because we knew the assets we were going to be able to make from it would be really, really valuable in ads. So if you have a video podcast or you can record the Zoom while you're doing it, it is likely you'll be able to make really good creative and teasers to take people to your episode. So we'll cover this one first and then we'll talk about the audio ones. So what I'm loving and what's working for me right now, I will run full episodes of video on Facebook, and that is working. On Twitter, Instagram, and what was the other one we're doing? Twitter,
Pinterest.
Pinterest, or YouTube, sorry. Pinterest hasn't started yet. We're coming to that. We're going to try that soon. On those three, what I'm having the most success from is that I'm actually using snippets, so short sections or teasers of the actual episodes with a link to, hey, come check out the full episode here. So trying to use like bite-sized content to take people into the next step. Or potentially linking them to a resource with the episode, which I think is doing pretty well also.
Mm-hmm. Are the podcasts that you're dealing with, are they interviews, or are you just talking, or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. It's actually a mixture of both. So I'm kind of a big fan of a show doing something what I call a content mix. So the way I kind of think about it is that if you're a podcaster and you're just doing interviews, there's only really one thing on the plate. So, you know, you've gone out for dinner, you've ordered a steak, and there's no fries. There's no, where's the potatoes? Like, you know, I want a little bit, where's my bread roll? Like, you know, you got to kind of mix it up. My personal view on podcasting, and this is my thing from here, is that I think it's really helpful and great if you can mix up your content style and serve your audience in unique ways. So in a month, like for me personally, I might do 2 interviews in a month, and then I might do 2 solo episodes a month where I get to deep dive into areas that I think we're really winning with and like help my audience further. So that's kind of my favorite flavor at the moment, and trying them both. All right. To come back though, because I want to make sure we keep this loop on the audio side. So there's 2 things we're doing with audio that I think are working reasonably well, one better than the other. So instead of using an audiogram, we have actually done some like just image ads. So we use like the podcast, like graphic you would use maybe on a blog post, or that you would use with your podcast artwork for that episode, and just running this episode with this person and then link to the episode. They're doing okay. Depending on the guest or what the topic is, they can do very reasonably well. But what I've actually been saying, actually I'll bring in my little apparatus here. Why not? Because you got to have the toys.
There you go.
So for those of you that are on the video, if you're on audio, you won't be able to see this. I've actually got a little tripod next to my computer now, with a full-time rig just set up for shooting short videos. And what I'd say is that if you record an audio podcast, one of the best things you can do with it is actually create a short video selling someone on the idea of listening to that podcast. So if we were doing this and like, let's pretend this interview's finished, but I'm you now. Okay, so I'm Scott.
Yeah.
So like I would finish this. I would literally turn this on and go, guys, Scott here. I've just finished recording this interview with Charlie. And this guy, apart from being ridiculously good looking, actually knows some things about podcasting. Now, if you want to tune into this episode, there is 3 things you're really going to be able to get from it. So if you listen through to here and go bang, 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 and essentially make it like a hook for that. So what I end up with is this little short video that I can use as an ad to bring people to my podcast and like entice them, make them feel it. And that is probably what I would say is if you have an audio only podcast, that's the most effective ad you can run. And I think it's a really strong way to do it. So that's my kind of little favorite way to do it. And you'll probably notice the theme here is that video ads do really well. That is universally true on these platforms at the moment. I'm seeing video ads just work the best across everything.
And you're trying to keep those to under what, at least a minute long, or less than 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Tim is asking the question on how long length of those ads should be versus maybe your snippets, or is it the same thing that you would see?
Yeah, again, we're testing this at the moment. Like these are some high quality questions, by the way. Do you know what's interesting is I love the idea is like it can never be too long, only too boring. And I think the Avengers have showed us that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I nearly wet myself in that last one. I was just not willing to move.
There's an app called runpee.com, just so you know. RUNPEE, and it tells you the best times to go in the middle of a movie to go to the restroom. It's actually started
that's actually a great idea.
It is. Actually, one of the guys that promotes it's actually an ex-NFL quarterback. I just found this out. So, seen an ad, but yeah, runpee.com. And what's beautiful is the ad. RunPee starts off white, and as you on the website, it starts to get yellow and yellow until it gets to the top and it starts shaking like it's yourself. Anyway, RunPee, run, listen.
I love that idea, but I will have to phrase this though. There are actually some restrictions. So, for example, like Twitter doesn't really like videos longer than, let's say, about 2 minutes.
Okay.
And LinkedIn doesn't like videos longer than, I think it's 10. It might be 15 now, but 10 minutes roughly.
It's 10 roughly, yeah.
So when we kind of consider these, is we like to keep them really short. And this is what's actually quite interesting as well, is that YouTube is the opportunity to do longer things, and so is Facebook. But you kind of got to recognize someone's intention. And this is why we mentioned intent before. So it's like, if you're disrupting someone on Twitter and it's like you're selling them on this hook, is like they're probably not in the position to consume a 40-minute podcast episode right here and now, but they might click and subscribe and listen to it later, or like, oh, that's actually really helpful, and visually represent the brand. So I'm kind of the 2-minute mark is a good place. And then if you're going to focus on YouTube more specifically, you can probably step it up to 5 if you want to do something a bit bigger or add more things to it.
Well, and that's the thing. You don't really get charged on YouTube until somebody's watched for at least 30 seconds or longer too. So it gives you some of that versus, what Facebook is 3 seconds counts as a view versus 30 seconds on Facebook, right?
Don't get me started on this. I'm going to, we're going to get into some real, so I will give Google credit here of like the most honorable system of like what a view actually is, like what an authentic view is. And I don't think anyone's upset as an advertiser for paying for an authentic view.
Right. Not at all.
But Twitter and Facebook and like this 3 second or 5 second, I think it's 6 seconds on Twitter now is counted, but it's like, it doesn't actually help anyone like at all. It's this really, really wasted metric. So I'll bring this one up here, like in Twitter and Facebook ads, how I'm actually tracking the success of my ads is, did people watch more than 25% of that? So if it's a 2-minute video, that's 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And I go, well, that is actually much more representative of like, okay, someone was actually like, oh, I'm interested in this.
That makes sense though. 25% is they actually dived into the content. 2-minute videos, 30 seconds on YouTube. But it's also an ideal amount that, hey, it's a lead generation again to go to something, go to your website or to iTunes. And that brings up a good question. Maybe we need to come back to it, but Peter is also asking a question. How important is it for you to have a website to come back to for a podcaster versus just sending them to iTunes or Spotify?
Again, some great quality questions here. So
we got good people, man. I told you we got great people here, Charlie.
I know. I just have to tell this quick story. I won't name the person. I have a good friend who's like I'm going to call it out. He's probably one of the best Facebook advertisers in the world. And we're at this event, and he gave one of the best presentations ever on like this really great strategy on like how to actually generate really good high quality leads. And then the presentation finishes, and he's like, "Does anyone have any questions?" And this girl put her hand up, like super excited. And she said, what's the difference between a Facebook page and your personal profile? And like, I just, I knew it because like he'd just given absolute gold, but it was just like, there was such a mismatch in like the value and where it was there. And what I love about these questions is like, you will actually get results with the things we're talking about here, which I just think is so great. So the question here about like having a website and coming back, like how important is it versus driving people to direct? So interestingly enough, like this is probably one of the most important things you got to think about. With a couple of the platforms, you can actually just target specific devices. So you can say, hey, I just want to target Apple users, and then you can link people to the podcast app. Now, I'm okay with doing that for a portion as long as you're tracking your subscribers and downloads in like something like Omni or Libsyn. It's definitely okay to drive people direct. But the other side of that is if I take people to my website, then I'm getting a lot more opportunity for building my email list, getting to know this person, putting them on a remarketing list. So there's like unique advantages. I say do both. I say test both and then derive the value from there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the things I think are still most important is like downloads per month and then also your email list growth per month, because like that is your opportunity to re-engage.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And that's the thing about bringing people to your website and having a website is you're giving them, I mean, you're accepting the SEO juice or the Google juice, as we like to say, versus just sending it off to somebody else. Because all these platforms out there really aren't there. They're not engaging in traffic to help you. They want the traffic for them. And except maybe YouTube. I think YouTube's different that way in that facet, besides besides Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, stuff like that. But I think the important thing is getting people to your website so that they're in your environment. They're seeing the other things you've got, the other products or the other episodes, or becoming, what is Charlie all about? What is Peter all about? What is Laura? What is Tim all about, to see the different opportunities that are available, and then giving them something to opt in. I mean, I know that you're doing a lot of retargeting and people are using pixels. I still like trying to grab that email so it's much more viable, so that I can follow up with them in an email blast, let them know what's going on, and taking that relationship to a whole different level. You know what I mean, Charlie? Does that make sense? What's your opinion about that?
Let's talk about it. This is a really important one. Earlier in this episode, I mentioned there's kind of three things that commonly come up. So the first thing is always like, how do I get people here?
Yeah.
Then I think there's this, and it's perfectly natural. This is me. This is most podcasters. At some point in the journey, you're like, does my content suck? Like, how can I make better podcast content? Like, I'm getting people here, but if the content's not good, like this just isn't going to work. And this is so true. You can be the best in the world at bringing people to your podcast, but if your content sucks, like no one's going to hang around or buy from you. But then the last component is like, how do we get people to actually like, how do we monetize this and turn it into other things? And like email for podcasters is a huge part of this. So to this day, even now, I've had many people listen to my podcast, but then it's actually over email is where they make a sale or a purchase. So it's super valuable to do it in that way. So I'll go through a few things here that I think are really important. So I'll use my show as the example because I feel like it's an easy one to understand contextually, and then anyone can do it. So when I do podcasts, many of the things we talk about, whether it's ads, whether it's making content, what questions to ask, how to find topics, we love to have like templates and resources that go alongside that. So if you listen to a podcast episode on, let's say, how to do an intro for a podcast, like how do you actually make a great intro? And we've got a fill in the blanks template with 3 examples sitting on our website. It just works really well to go, hey, we'll go grab that resource to match up with this episode. So it makes really good logical sense for someone to get bonus material that supports them succeeding in the things that you talk about on the podcast. Does really well for me. And if anyone wants that intro, by the way, go to the resources page. It's on there on our website. So that's been a really good one. So from like how we build our list, like it's such an important one. We love that. And then the next one is we actually do a weekly email, which we call Podcaster's Edge. And this is something where I write out an email every week that is exclusive content to help someone have a better podcast. Now, what I love about this is the idea that it's content where people are expecting to get another email from you. Like if I could give anything away or a hint on like how to do better with email marketing, if you incentivize your whole list on the idea of getting something from you and never hearing from you again, you're kind of like hoping they're going to open another email. They're like, oh, well, there's a chance you want this. You didn't say you wanted it. I never told you it was coming or anything from there. I'm just going to keep sending you things. Like it's not as nice a relationship. So one of the ones I love if you're a podcaster, because you're already repeatedly communicating with your audience, is to have that weekly email, or if you can, a daily email or 2-a-week email that supports your show to enhance that whole experience. And since we've been bringing those two elements together, like substantially a really, really good way to do it. And then I always put a link to my email list in my ads. So if people are watching this and they go, oh, I'd love to jump on this list, then we can make it nice and easy for them as well.
That makes sense. So once a week, you're sending an email out to your audience. That was going to be the questions I was going to ask here. Do you ever increase that in a variety of things, or you try to stick to that once a week and get it done and stick to it? Because I think consistency is key. But are you ever adjusting that amount you're sending out?
That's a really good question as well. And I've been criticized of this by some of my friends who are like, dude, you need to send 3 emails a week. Like, it will really help you. And I just found for me personally with my other obligations that it meant the emails I was sending weren't as good a quality. Like when I write an email, I don't sit there with the browser open, writing it out and then send it. Like I actually spend some time structuring it, writing something valuable, getting some screenshots, and like there's some intention into it, like being a really valuable email. And while I don't, mail as often as I probably should, and I think, if you can create 2 great emails a week or 3 great emails a week, I think you should send them. But from my point of view, to send 1 great email where someone's going to read this and go, I'm actually better off for this email. Like this email is actually going to help me do something here. And then it's keeping me informed and doing benefit. I just feel like that's the relationship I want with my my audience. And it's the same with the podcast. Like I release 1 podcast episode a week. I probably could release 2, but it would detract from the quality and time I spend planning it out, researching the guests, finding new ways to do it. Like I'm a quality guy, not a quantity guy. And I think a lot of people making a lot of noise could benefit from that advice.
That's really good. That's really good counsel. Everybody's got advice like an asshole. All right. But counsel, not everybody is going to give you good counsel out there. And you can use that. You like that, don't you?
I do. I'm going to steal that. I'm actually going to steal that. I'm going around to everyone right now saying I came up with radio syndication for podcasts and counsel. It's mine now. No, I'm kidding. Of course not.
Well, but you said something once a week and you're sending out 1 episode. Are you sending the email at the same day your episodes release as part of the part of the content of the email? Or is the email you're sending out completely separate then from what your episode is being launched that week? Great
question. So a bit of both. I'll explain this from here. My podcast goes out on Wednesdays, and I normally send my email on a Thursday. And then sometimes the email is actually about the podcast episode that's coming out. And other times it's actually about something related to podcasts for there. And I'll give you an example. I really like this one, and I think you'll appreciate this as well. Sometimes I record a podcast and it just goes way too long. Like it's meant to be a 40-minute interview and it goes for like 90 minutes or longer than that. And like, previously I would just like release a long episode, where I've started actually cutting it into 2 and making those multi-part series. So that actually happened, right? And so this week's email is actually about, I've recorded way too long and I've decided to turn it into a 2-part. So if you want to experience that 2-parter, like look at how I've done it here. The actual podcast episode isn't about 2-part series on long episodes, but it offers an immense amount of value on like how you can do that using multi-part series to drive engagement and bringing them back to your show, and just more things in line with that.
And are you using a variety of different like pretty links or bit links if you're discussing things in there, so you can track to see who's clicking on what and kind of engagement and click-through ratios on all of that stuff too, Charlie?
Yeah, we are definitely paying attention to that stuff and experimenting with it. What's interesting is I did this test where it's like I didn't put any links in my email under the idea that people already would use their podcast app. So they're actually just going to their podcast app and subscribing. And the advantage of that is like it's getting through spam filters. Like we're actually getting better deliverability if we don't put as many links in it. And then on the reverse, like if we put a link for each platform or a nice pretty button to go, oh, if you're on iTunes, click here. If you're on there, like what happens there? And funnily enough, like it didn't distinctly change it one way or another.
Wow.
So what I've been playing with at the moment or experimenting with is I'll put a link to my website, to go and watch the video and see the full thing from there. But then I'm actually referencing, go to your podcast app, like open it up and it'll be there. And that is the flavor of the month at the moment. But you'll kind of get by the gist of this conversation is like, I'm very fluid in what I think is working or not working, because we just live in this world of change. Like the Yellow Pages was a great idea once upon a time. Blockbuster franchises were a great investment. And like that will change, and so do many things in podcasting. So very, very open to trying new ideas and experimenting with link placements, when you promote, how you promote, quantity, variety, and all that.
On your episodes, are you playing with the different call to actions and how many times you ask people to subscribe to the show? Are you seeing success when you're doing that, or is it just something you do? Hey, you've scheduled that on a regular basis? Because I know you did a lot of research for the time that I was on there. You were bringing up things that like, whoa, you did really dive into on the full facet of the different things that we do. But I think a lot of people forget that hey, subscribe, or hey, leave a review. Just that simple ask sometimes can go a long way. Or hey, if you want to get more information, go to the website, or if you want to opt in, text the word notes to sending 2,000. Just some simple call to actions that make it simple for everybody. What are some of the things that you've seen that you've tested out that have worked well, or basically other things that have bombed?
Yeah, this is a good one. Do you want to know the biggest secret here? Like, do you want to know like overwhelmingly like the most powerful thing, right? Make really good content.
Yeah.
I promise you, if you spend time making your content awesome, people will look for the subscribe button. And it's like, when you think about it, what type of person do you want on your show? Do you want someone that's like, holy shit, I've got to subscribe to this show. Where's the button? Like, because they're actively like, this is so good, I want to come back for more. Or is it the person you had to remind, hey, just if you can, like, subscribe when you've got time. And it's like, oh no, maybe I'll do that. Like, which is the subscriber you want? And I've always gone with that, there's certain people in this world that don't ask to subscribe. And like Joe Rogan is one of them. Like, this is clearly a dude that just does what he wants, but his content is phenomenally good for his audience if you're in that audience. And it's like, you can watch him break every best practice in the world and still be the most powerful podcast. Like, he's more powerful than the news. And when you look at that, and like Oprah would be the same. This is another one. Like, there's so many of these outliers that because of the phenomenal quality of their content, that these little tactics become less of an issue. So my first thing is, and to your point, is like, spend time making great content. When I had you on my show, I spent over an hour listening to episodes, going through your stuff. Like, so when you came on my show, we could have a really good conversation and like create high quality content. So that's my number one tip, is like, you really, content creation as a podcaster is a skill you can get better at. So step one. The next thing we really noticed is, and you can't ignore this at all, is drop off rates. So it doesn't matter, like, if you have a 10-minute podcast or a 10-hour podcast, there is less people listening at the end than there is at the start. So if you only promote at the end of your episodes, then there is a far less chance of people actually hearing those call to actions or go to the website or subscribe to the show. So one of the things I started doing, and if anyone checks out my show, like, this has gotten a big bump in my own show and in the clients' shows, like, we've tested this on everyone, we get everyone to do it, is we actually put the call to action at the start. So I record a separate intro for every podcast, yours included, where I'll actually record a big hook. So record an intro of telling someone why they should listen to this podcast, what they're going to get from it, what the most valuable bits are, and just like make them hungry, make them thirsty for what's to come. And then I will put in a bit of going, if you enjoy our content, please make sure to subscribe to the show. And we actually have some additional resources on our website. So if you would like to get this framework that goes with this episode, or perhaps you want help with this part of your podcast, go to this URL and get this stuff here. Now let's get into the interview with Scott. And that's how we've been playing it. And that's been a substantially better way to get the call to actions in early. And I'll just preface one more thing here, not to go rant too long. If you do that type of intro and you run your full episode as an ad, you've literally just put a call to action in the start of your ad. So then when you're running that as a podcast ad, that will actually drive people to your site and to other things as well.
Mm-hmm. And with Joe Rogan, if you can get beyond the 15 minutes of red ads to get to the actual episode, you're happy. But so is advertisers completely as well too. That's the thing that drives me bonkers with listening to Joe Rogan. Like, I got to fast forward 10 minutes later, and he's still pitching.
Do you know what is fascinating to me though, is that everyone I know fast forwards it. Like, do his advertisers not know this?
That's that's the thing I was curious about. It's not the same question I did. Guys, if you have some more questions, feel free to type them into the chat roll. We'll make sure and get them answered or ask them out there for it. You are doing so much across a variety of different things. What would you recommend if somebody's got a limited budget, limited resources with their podcast? What would you say is maybe the top one or two things that they could do to see it, probably an instantaneous spike or a little bit of a spike to help them grow their audience or grow their show?
And that's a really good question. I mean, I'm very, very fortunate. Like, I've got a team of 25 here. Like, so my leverage is like, and I shouldn't do this to them, but I do. It's like, right, Twitter ads today. Work it out.
Well, but that's what you do. Everybody does that, right? I've walked in my office. Okay, what are we doing? Nope, we're not doing that. We're doing this today. And everybody just like rolls their eyes, right?
Not to digress here, but I actually, within my team, I have my own team that works on my stuff. And the reason we had to set that up is because I was distracting too many of the other people from getting the important work done. So we had to put in some walls to stop it. Anyway, that is such a good question, right? Of like, what can I do if I'm on a limited budget, limited resource that comes from here? And there's probably a few things that are here. So one, do video. It will actually cost you very little extra, maybe a webcam if you're already recording. I think that your potential gains versus your cost are like outstandingly high there. So that would be like, if you limited budget, that's one of the best things you can do. Second thing is that it costs you nothing to get better at making good podcast content. So if you really want to see success in your show, you've got to be putting out like exceptional content. So that could be researching good podcasters and seeing how they interview, bringing unique elements to your show, spending time like planning your episodes better and being more strategic with how it leads into your business. Like, that's some stuff that can work really well. And then thirdly, and this is just my bias here, but I would say pick the platform that is most suited to your audience. So whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, like, where does your audience spend the most time? And like, just focus on that platform there. And then I'd probably say you can get away with $5 a day in ads on that platform. And then that will be enough to bring in to really turn that up. And then over time, the compound effect of like mixing that out with great content, video assets, being in front of the people you've done, like, will move the snowball in the right direction. What not to do? Just be posting just crappy single organic posts on every platform. Think it's doing anything for growing your show, because it's not.
No, it's not exactly out there. And the question, I guess we ask the question, how do you find out which platform is best for your show? Is there any ninja secrets to that? Or just, I mean, it comes from knowing your avatar, knowing really who your listener is, and then knowing who's on what platforms. Because like, I know that Instagram is our least effective platform because I have a little bit older listener base. Like, my avatar is 35 to 65, college educated, making 75 to 250 a year. They're not spending a lot of time on Instagram, so I don't put a lot into the Instagram. I mean, I post the show art, but don't spend a lot of time on there specifically. I spend more time on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube because that's where I see the biggest bang for my buck for my listeners. So any tips for helping people discover which platforms are the best for their shows?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. All of the platforms actually have, when you go into ads, like, you can create a targeting list and see how many people that fit your criteria are there. And like, demographics is one thing. So like age, location, gender is there, but I think it's the next level of targeting that really makes the difference. Like, effectively all of them have people in your age, location, and gender that you probably want to target.
Right.
But then it's like, you've got to think about how they're spending their time there. So if people are getting on YouTube and like asking a lot of like how to close distressed real estate, how to buy an investment property, like, that stuff's probably really good for your show. But then on the reverse, it's like, if you look towards things like Instagram, like, it's very much fitness, travel, hobbies, very visual niches. So if you're in something that suits take photos of it, that's probably a good one for you. And then B2B, LinkedIn is a really good one, is the way I think about it. And then Facebook is, I can't believe I'm even saying this, but it's like, because it's like, I grew up with Facebook, but it's like, Facebook is for older people now. Like, the kids, they don't use it like we do.
I remember there's some movie or some ad where I saw Facebook wall where a lady taking the pictures and slapped them against the wall. There's my wall for Facebook there, It's different now. It's an older aging platform than what it is out there. And just know where everybody's at and spend the time on there. The $1 million question here. When is it too early to start looking for sponsors or advertisers for your podcast? You with those different shows that you're working with, is there a time frame, 60 days, 6 months, 50,000 downloads, day one? What are you seeing kind of the mean aspect of it? We always know there's outliers for everything, but where do you see the best for somebody who's kind of starting out and brand new?
That's a really good question. I almost I just recorded a podcast episode with Tim Sulo from Ahrefs, who's the marketing manager, and they spent like $200,000 sponsoring podcasts last year. It was so insightful to spend that time talking about it. And the way there was a couple of things I took from that interview in thinking about it differently. We have shows that have sponsors and we look after them as well. But like what Tim said was just so interesting that really kind of changed the game for me, was like, how are you making it valuable for them? So I actually don't mind if you've got one listener or 1 million, as long as you can make the value exchange work. So if you've got a really good show, but maybe it's a smaller audience, but that audience is just so valuable to someone else, you can definitely start to look for sponsors. But if at the same time you've got a massive audience, but they're not very engaged, well, then it's unlikely your sponsor's going to get anything out of it. So you've got to create something that's sponsor worthy, and then that's the moment. That's the way of doing it from there. And I'll just throw on that topic as well is like, go listen to the interview with Tim. In all honesty, he says some like crazy important stuff for podcasters, over an hour about it. But again, I think what was really, really interesting from his perspective is like the placement of the ad and how the ad is read, and then additional things that go with it. Like, are you going to send it to your email list? Mm-hmm. Are you going to promote us on social? Like, or are you just going to like literally give us 10 seconds of airtime on a podcast episode? So there's ways of kind of value stacking that uniquely as well.
Yeah, it's the full media package. I mean, that's the thing. If you think about the Super Bowl, they're selling almost every space from just 30 seconds of airtime. It's also what's being sold on the banners in the park, on the cups, on the napkins. How much of that extra space can you give your potential sponsors or advertisers? And that's one of the big things I tell people all the time. Like, listen, that's why it's important to grow your social media, because yes, 30 seconds of on-air read time is good, but an email blast out to your audience or a posting on the platforms with a link or just sharing something else that can make that relationship so much more valuable will help you stand out, especially if you're in competition with another show that they're looking at. Oh, hey, each show's gonna give us 30 seconds, but this one show's gonna give us a whole lot more real estate, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things I think podcast is like, I've sponsored shows as well. Like we've sponsored podcasts to effectively for our show. It's a really good way of growing your own podcast is to sponsor other podcasts, by the way. Another paid approach that's not organic that works. Mm-hmm. Just put that one in the bank. But what was really interesting is what did best for us is we would actually sponsor shows and say, I want to come on as a guest. Let me come in and say natively why we're awesome and explain properly like how we help people get a great result. And if they would agree to that in the package, undoubtedly it would do awesome. So I'll give you like an example. Let's say you've got a podcast on podcasts. Why not?
Right. There you go.
If I could have Rode, which is, I'm using a Rode mic at the moment, come on and tell me how to use this equipment better, how to get a better result with it, what people do wrong with it, how it works with this, and like, how can people succeed as podcasters better with Rode equipment? I would happily have them on for an episode. And you know what? It'd probably sell a ton of their stuff as well. But I'm fine with that as long as it's delivered in that way. Mm-hmm. If it's a pitch vest of them saying, hey, buy my crap, like that's not what it's about as podcasters. And I think we forget as our audience that often these advertisers like could actually have a lot of useful information that would help our audience get more success.
Mm-hmm. Tamara asked the question, what's the best way that you've seen to approach a potential advertiser or sponsor? You have a plan that you put in place. You obviously do some research beforehand and want to make sure that advertiser is a good fit for your show and your listener base. But what else besides that, Charlie?
Yeah. So if you're there's a few ways to look at this. Like if you, let's say you are the podcast host and you're looking for sponsors, what I would encourage you to do is, I love this tool called Loom, right? It's this video tool. It's been, and I think there's like a whole bunch of other ones that do the same thing. Effectively, it's like you screen record a video link software. Anyway, what I'll do is, if I've got a sponsor I want, like let's say I do want Rode, which I do want Rode, by the way, I might even do this, what I recommend here is like, buy their stuff, go out and get their product or service and actually use it, make a review of it on Loom, and then send it to them and tell them why they would be a great person to sponsor your show. And it's like, all these companies get pitched so much. Like, I feel so bad for Tim. Like, his inbox is just flooded with people like, Ahrefs, sponsor this. But no one's going the extra mile to talk about like how it could be great for them. So it's like, if you want to sponsor, get involved in their brand, show them that you've actually like listened to their content, read their stuff, used their product, whatever it is that makes them a really good fit, and then explain why they're a really good fit for your audience and then how you can help them the most. Send it via a Loom, do it as a video, because no one else will. That video will get watched. You will actually cut through the noise and be able to open up a proper conversation from there.
It's huge, huge, huge. Taking the time to listen. Our buddies Joe and Matt were doing an affiliate thing today, and that's one of the things that the affiliate guys kept saying over and over again. Use the product, do a review of it, become an expert on what you're trying to promote, and that will you'll stand out heads and tails above everybody else. They're just saying, hey, we want a link, we want to be an affiliate. Doing the extra work to be familiar not only adds value to your sites, but they also adds value to the sponsors, because they know that, hey, you're really a cheerleader for them, a brand ambassador now, whether it's micro or something that has a really, carries a big stick of listeners that can really dive into, and hey, buy a lot of Rode microphones or whatever you're
I shouldn't turn my camera that way. You would think I'm sponsored by Rode if I turn my camera. Like, there's a shelf full of their stuff here.
That's good stuff there. Question: are you running ads? Is there specific days of the week that you're running ads, or are you just running them nonstop, pretty much?
I wish there was universal truths to this. So with it, let's say I've got a new show, I'm trying to have like a blanket of testing rather than say, okay, this or that. Because the truth is, it's different per show. And I'll give you an example. If you're in business, in general, Monday to Fridays do better. Because a lot of business guys kind of switch into like, I'm at home dad on the weekend. Yeah. They don't consume that type of content. On the reverse, like investing. So like, we have a property investment show in Australia we look after. Similar niche to yours. And we find their content does really well on the weekends. Like, people are actually like, because it's a hobby kind of niche as well. Like, people that are maybe working a 9 to 5, the weekend is when they get to be their investor version of themselves. So quite interesting one. And then health, pretty much every day seems to go all right. So it's quite fascinating. I would start with every day, and then like, you'll be able to see that data and just start drawing down the days that aren't working.
That makes a lot of sense there. Charlie, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, to follow up there, to listen to your episodes? And I highly, highly recommend it out there, guys, especially that last episode you were talking about on the $200,000 spent on podcasting. Great episode. I was just listening to that a few minutes before we jumped on here. But what's the best way for people to reach out, to follow you, to dive and get more information on what you're doing?
Thank you so much for the kind words. Like, a lot went into making that episode with Tim. Like, it was, I think it's a particularly strong episode of the show for podcasters who want sponsors. So best place to go, valhermedia.com is our website. We house everything on there. There's a link for the podcast. We also have a link for a ton of free resources to download, and templates we make, so you can do this stuff. And then I've got my weekly email, which is Podcaster's Edge. So if you do want to get a weekly email from me, where I'll give you little tips and hints on how to make your podcast explode, then there's also that available from there.
Awesome stuff. Highly encourage it, everybody. We got people coming back saying great episode. People loved it already out there. So, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. What time is it there in Australia right now?
11 a.m. We're just getting started.
We're just getting started, and we're getting into the evening here in Texas. It's 8 o'clock here. So good stuff as always. Love to have you back on a future episode if you're up for it.
Anytime. It would be my absolute pleasure to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and delivering time, just delivering great content as always. So looking forward to catching up with you again as well too. So, all right, everybody. Hey, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Mass Media Mastermind podcast. Thank you so much for those that asked questions. Thank you so much for sharing. If this is valuable, as always, guys, feel free to share it out there with your fellow podcasters. Go out, take some action, everybody, and we'll see you all at the top.